Many adults find themselves struggling with anxiety, self-doubt, or unfulfilling relationships without fully understanding the root cause. Often, these emotional patterns trace back to childhood experiences with emotionally immature parents, caregivers who were unable to provide consistent support, empathy, or validation. Instead of fostering emotional growth, these parents often left their children feeling unseen, unheard, or responsible for the parents' well-being. As a result, the child grows into an adult who carries invisible wounds, unclear boundaries, and a deep longing for connection and self-understanding. Recognizing and healing from the impact of emotionally immature parenting is a crucial step toward building healthier relationships and reclaiming one's emotional life. Children who grow up with emotionally immature parents often experience a deep sense of emotional neglect, even if their physical needs were met. These parents may be consider their child's emotional world, unable or unwilling to attune to their feelings, and frequently prioritize their own needs or discomfort over the child's emotional development. As a result, the child learns early on that expressing needs, emotions, or vulnerability is unsafe or ineffective. Over time, this teaches a child to suppress their inner world in favor of staying safe, invisible, or agreeable. The psychological impact of this environment is far-reaching. As adults, these individuals often struggle with low self-worth, anxiety, and a chronic sense of emptiness or emotional disconnection. They may second-guess themselves frequently or look to others for validation and guidance because they never learn to trust their own feelings or intuition. This can manifest in people-pleasing behaviors, difficulty making decisions, or forming secure attachments. Many develop an overly strong inner critic, shaped by years of being subtly or overtly told that their emotional needs were inconvenient or irrelevant. Emotionally immature parents often operate in extremes. They may be overly reactive, coldly detached, or emotionally inconsistent. Their unpredictability fosters hypervigilance in the child, who learns to constantly scan for emotional cues to avoid conflict or abandonment. As adults, this hyper-awareness can become emotional codependency, where their self-worth becomes tied to managing or fixing other people's moods. Because they were conditioned to attend to others rather than themselves, they may have difficulty identifying or expressing their own feelings, making authentic relationships difficult. These individuals also tend to experience a persistent fear of rejection or disapproval. Emotional immaturity in parents can lead to children receiving love and attention only when they conform, succeed, or suppress their true selves. This conditional love plants a seed of shame, the feeling that they are only worthy when they perform, serve, or remain small. As adults, they may carry a constant anxiety that being real, emotional, or imperfect will result in abandonment or criticism. Although emotionally immature parents may not have intended to cause harm, their limitations can have a lasting impact. Their inability to mirror their child's emotions or provide safe emotional containers deprives the child of essential tools for identity formation. This often results in a fragile sense of self that is easily destabilized by conflict, rejection, or emotional demands. Many adult children find themselves repeating patterns of seeking emotionally unavailable partners, overcompensating in relationships, or avoiding vulnerability altogether. Understanding the root of these patterns can be both painful and liberating. It reframes lifelong emotional struggles not as personal failures, but as natural responses to early unmet needs. This clarity opens a door for adult children to begin healing, develop emotional intelligence, and build a stronger, more stable identity based on self-compassion and awareness. When children grow up with emotionally immature parents, they are often placed in roles that reverse the natural parent-child dynamic. Instead of receiving emotional support and guidance, they become the caregivers, emotionally and sometimes even physically. This phenomenon, known as parentification, places inappropriate responsibility on the child to meet the emotional needs of the parent. The child may be expected to calm the parent's moods, manage their insecurities, or provide companionship and reassurance. Over time, the child internalizes the belief that their worth is tied to how well they can care for or regulate others. This role reversal creates confusion around boundaries and identity. The child never gets a chance to fully develop a sense of self because their attention is consumed by monitoring and reacting to the parent's emotional state. They learn to suppress their own feelings, needs, and even thoughts in order to maintain peace or prevent emotional chaos. As adults, These individuals may continue to play the role of caretaker in their relationships, constantly anticipating others' needs while neglecting their own. This can result in chronic exhaustion, resentment, and a sense of invisibility. Children in this dynamic often feel responsible for things that are far beyond their control. If the parent is depressed, anxious, or volatile, the child may believe it's their fault or their job to fix it. This instills a deep sense of guilt and an overdeveloped sense of duty. Even in adulthood, they may struggle with saying no, setting limits, or tolerating others' discomfort. They fear that asserting themselves will be perceived as selfish or unloving, because that's the message they received growing up. Another consequence is the lack of a secure emotional foundation. In healthy families, parents serve as a consistent source of support and regulation. But when the parent is emotionally immature, the child cannot rely on them. Instead, the child becomes self-reliant far too early. While this might appear as maturity from the outside, it's actually a survival mechanism rooted in emotional deprivation. As adults, these individuals often have difficulty trusting others or asking for help, because they learned long ago that vulnerability leads to disappointment or punishment. This early conditioning also leads to chronic overfunctioning. Adult children of emotionally immature parents may take on too much responsibility in all areas of life, at work, in friendships, or in romantic relationships, without recognizing that they're doing it to maintain a sense of control or to earn love. They often attract partners or friends who are emotionally unavailable or needy, mirroring the original family dynamic. Subconsciously, they're trying to resolve their childhood wounds by succeeding in a role they were forced into. The emotional cost of this role reversal can be long-lasting, but it often goes unrecognized because it was normalized from an early age. What felt like love and loyalty as a child was actually emotional labor. These adults may sense something is off in their relationships or their inability to rest, but can't always trace it back to this early reversal of roles. Growing up with emotionally immature parents often teaches children that their needs, preferences, and boundaries are not important or even dangerous to express. These parents may be dismissive, reactive, or manipulative when a child tries to assert themselves, leading the child to associate boundary setting with conflict, rejection, or shame. As a result, the child learns to prioritize keeping the peace and meeting others' expectations, rather than developing a clear sense of their own limits and values. This environment severely disrupts the development of healthy assertiveness. Children in these families may be punished, directly or subtly, for speaking up or expressing disagreement. Emotionally immature parents might react with anger, withdrawal, guilt-tripping, or victimhood when challenged, leaving the child feeling confused and responsible for the parent's emotional reactions. Over time, this dynamic teaches a child to stay silent, accommodate, or avoid confrontation at all costs. Even as adults, they may feel intense discomfort when setting boundaries, fearing that doing so will result in abandonment or disapproval. Many adult children of emotionally immature parents become chronic people pleasers. They are often hypersensitive to others' feelings and constantly try to anticipate and meet others' needs, even when it comes at a personal cost. This adaptive behavior may have been necessary in childhood to avoid emotional outbursts or win approval, but in adulthood, it leads to burnout, resentment, and the inability to maintain authentic relationships. Because they were conditioned to believe that their worth is tied to compliance or helpfulness, saying no can feel like a betrayal rather than a healthy act of self-care. The absence of strong personal boundaries also creates vulnerability to toxic or one-sided relationships. Without a clear sense of where they end and others begin, these individuals often take on others' emotions as their own, assume responsibility for others' problems, and find it difficult to recognize when they are being mistreated. They may feel guilty for wanting space, expressing their needs, or advocating for themselves, even in situations where their rights are clearly being violated. This leaves them open to exploitation and emotional manipulation. Additionally, many struggle with decision-making and trusting their own judgment because their autonomy was undermined in childhood. Either by being controlled, dismissed, or overruled, they often doubt themselves as adults. Even small choices can provoke anxiety, and they may defer to others to avoid the fear of getting it wrong. This lack of self-trust stems from a lifetime of being taught that their feelings and thoughts were less valid than those of the parent. Ultimately, the inability to establish and maintain boundaries is not due to weakness, but to deep, Early conditioning. It reflects a childhood where survival depended on compliance, invisibility, or emotional overfunctioning. Learning how to assert oneself and set boundaries as an adult requires unlearning those early messages and beginning to see one's needs not as a burden, but as a right. Developing assertiveness and boundaries involves reconnecting with the self, learning to value one's voice, tolerate others' discomfort, and understand that saying no is not a rejection, but a vital expression of self-respect. Recognition of a parent's emotional immaturity is a pivotal turning point for many adult children. For years, they may have internalized a belief that they were somehow flawed, too sensitive, or simply not good enough to receive love, attention, or understanding. When these individuals begin to see that their parents lack the capacity for emotional attunement, not because of the child's failings, but due to the parent's own limitations, they start to untangle their identity from the emotional wounds of their upbringing. This shift in perspective can bring immense clarity. Many adult children spend their lives trying to win the approval of parents who are incapable of giving it. Thinking if they just try harder, behave better, or achieve more, they'll finally be acknowledged. Recognizing emotional immaturity in the parent reframes this cycle, not as a personal shortcoming, but as an impossible task. It becomes clear that no amount of effort can change a parent who lacks self-awareness, empathy, or the capacity for genuine emotional connection. The process of recognition also allows the adult child to stop seeking emotional safety in the same place they were once hurt. Instead of trying to change or fix the parent, they can begin to redirect their energy toward healing themselves. This includes acknowledging the ways they adapted in childhood by suppressing feelings, becoming hyper-independent, or constantly caregiving, and how those adaptations may no longer serve them in adulthood. With understanding comes self-compassion, a critical part of unlearning shame and guilt carried for years. Many also experience grief during this stage. Grieving the parent they never had, or the emotionally safe family environment they long for, can be deeply painful. It involves letting go of the fantasy that the parent will one day change, apologize, or become emotionally available. This grief is not just about the loss of what was, but also what could have been. It can feel like a betrayal to emotionally separate from a parent, but it's often necessary to begin forming a more stable and authentic sense of self. As adult children stop blaming themselves for their parents' emotional limitations, they can begin to make more empowered choices. This may include setting boundaries, limiting contact, or redefining the terms of the relationship. For some, it may mean going no contact entirely. For others, it might involve interacting with more realistic expectations and emotional detachment. In either case, these choices stem from clarity, not resentment. With this recognition comes a freedom to explore healthy relationships based on mutual respect and emotional reciprocity. It becomes possible to identify what real support looks like, what safety feels like, and how to express emotions without fear of rejection or judgment. Rather than reenacting old family dynamics, the adult child begins to cultivate a more secure inner world, one where their needs are valid, their feelings are respected, and their identity is no longer defined by trying to meet someone else's emotional deficits. Emotional maturity is not something automatically inherited or modeled when a child is raised by emotionally immature parents. However, adult children of such parents can learn and cultivate emotional maturity through conscious effort, reflection, and self-development. The key realization is that emotional patterns learned in childhood, such as avoidance, overaccommodation, or emotional suppression, can be unlearned and replaced with healthier ways of relating to oneself and others. Healing is not about changing the parent, but about changing one's own internal dynamics and emotional responses. Developing emotional maturity starts with self-awareness. Adult children of emotionally immature parents often operate on autopilot, reacting out of ingrained patterns of fear, guilt, or shame. By learning to recognize emotional triggers and examine the beliefs behind them, they begin to take responsibility for their emotional world without blaming themselves for their upbringing. This involves noticing when they're overfunctioning in relationships, ignoring their own needs, or reacting as if they're still trying to win a parent's love or approval. Through therapy, journaling, or introspective practices, they learn to identify these patterns and replace them with conscious, grounded choices. One of the hallmarks of emotional maturity is the ability to manage emotions without becoming overwhelmed or shutting down. Adult children of emotionally immature parents often didn't learn emotional regulation because their caregivers themselves lacked that skill. As adults, they can learn how to soothe themselves, express feelings constructively, and remain centered in the face of conflict or rejection. This involves learning to sit with discomfort rather than avoid it, recognizing that emotions are temporary, and that expressing them does not make them weak or burdensome. Building boundaries is also a major component of emotional maturity. Whereas their upbringing may have taught them that boundaries are selfish or dangerous, learning to set and maintain limits is an act of self-respect and relational clarity. This doesn't mean becoming cold or disconnected. It means understanding where one person ends and another begins. It means being able to say no without guilt and yes without resentment. With practice, adult children develop the ability to protect their energy and prioritize relationships that are reciprocal and respectful. Another aspect of emotional maturity is developing a secure sense of self. When raised by emotionally immature parents, children often form their identity around what others expect of them. In adulthood, this translates to a fragile self-concept that shifts based on external validation. Cultivating emotional maturity involves rediscovering one's own values, interests, and desires independent of others' approval. It means learning to trust one's own feelings and judgments, and making choices that align with authenticity rather than fear or obligation. Emotional maturity is not perfection. It's a capacity to reflect, repair, and grow. It includes the ability to have difficult conversations, take responsibility for one's actions, and show empathy without losing oneself. As adult children break free from childhood roles and dynamics, they step into a space where emotional connection, stability, and fulfillment are possible, not through others changing, but through their own inner transformation. Healing from the effects of being raised by emotionally immature parents is a challenging but deeply transformative journey. It involves recognizing how early emotion neglect shaped your sense of self, learning to set healthy boundaries, and developing emotional skills that were never modeled in childhood. While your parents may never change or offer the understanding you long for, you have the power to break the cycle. By cultivating self-awareness, practicing self-compassion, and building emotionally healthy relationships, you can create a life rooted in authenticity, resilience, and emotional maturity. The past may explain your patterns, but it doesn't have to define your future.